Is the United States at war with Russia?
It's what I call an almost war. I mean, we're obviously not doing the actual fighting. We don't have trigger pullers out there on the ground, but we're about as close as you can get to participating in this war without formally being in it. The Russians basically think we're at war with them. But anyway, back to providing intelligence for missiles to hit inside of Russia. For that to really matter, we have to give the Ukrainians missiles, and then we have to give them permission to use those missiles. And just to take the famous ATACMS, which we once gave to the Ukrainians, Trump stopped giving the Ukrainians ATACMS, and he's not giving them permission to use those ATACMS. So today, when we talk about giving intelligence to the Ukrainians, we think about it in the context of giving the Ukrainians Tomahawk missiles. Trump has made no decision to give them Tomahawk missiles. And even if he does give them Tomahawk missiles, it's not clear that he'll give them certainly blanket permission to use them, but even in selected instances, it's probably going to be the case that he won't let them use the Tomahawks. So I think that there is escalatory potential here if he were to give the Ukrainians lots of Tomahawks and give them blanket use, but I just don't think that's going to happen. It is realistic. There's no question about that. I mean, you have all sorts of weapons in the inventories of countries like the United States, China, and Russia that have a dual use capability. They can be used conventionally, or they can be used with a nuclear warhead on them. A good example of this, by the way, is when people talk about fighting a possible war between the United States and China, and the United States starts attacking Chinese military equipment and weaponry. The problem that you run into is a lot of the missiles and planes that you think you're destroying, that you think are conventional weapons, may have nuclear warheads on them. And the command and control systems that the Chinese have are used for both nuclear war fighting and conventional war fighting. So if you start tearing those command and control systems apart, it influences the nuclear balance, not just the conventional balance. So you run into the risk of inadvertent nuclear escalation, which would be a disaster. And then if we go back to the Russian case, if you're the Russians and you see a Tomahawk missile coming at you, and you know that it can have either a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead, there will be at least a few people who think worst case and think it may be a nuclear warhead on that missile. Oh, there's no question of that. I mean, you saw it with the ATACMS that we have given them. But the question is, how many weapons do you give them? And I think in an important way, the key issue is how effective those weapons are. For example, if we were to give the Ukrainians, let's say 25 Tomahawk missiles, and the Russians were able to just shoot them down routinely, it wouldn't matter that much. But if you give them 250 Tomahawks, and those are deadly effective weapons that they simply can't shoot down, that's a very different story. The potential for escalation in that second story is much greater than it is in the first story. So I think even if Trump were to give the Ukrainians Tomahawks, my guess would be that he would really limit when they could use those Tomahawks, and he would limit how many they could use, because Trump, like Biden before him, understands that we are always flirting with the possibility of nuclear war when we up the ante vis-a-vis the Russians. When I was watching Secretary Hegseth talk, I kept thinking about two words, maybe three words. One was command presence, and the other word was gravitas. And what you expect from the Secretary of Defense, what you would expect from a general officer, and I would argue from even colonels and majors and captains, is command presence. And you would also expect those individuals, especially the higher you go up the chain of command, to include civilians like the Secretary of Defense, to have gravitas, to look like they're adults, to look like they're your parents, or your grandparents. You know, these are responsible people. These are people who have the fate of the country in their hands. And I would just say, when you watch Secretary of Defense Hegseth, you see none of that. This is a man who has zero gravitas and zero command presence. And he's actually kind of funny. I mean, the substance of what he says is not funny. And certainly the substance of what President Trump said is, for the most part, not funny. But with regard to Secretary of Defense Hegseth, it's actually kind of funny. And I've watched some of the late night shows doing parodies of him, and he provides abundant material for them for all the obvious reasons.
San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, they're very unsafe places, and we're going to straighten them out one by one. And this is going to be a major part for some of the people in this room. That's a war, too. It's a war from within. Controlling the physical territory of our border is essential to national security. We can't let these people in.
I don't believe they were pleased at all to hear what President Trump was saying. And I think they understand that what he was saying is a threat to liberal democracy. The idea that you're going to go to war against the enemy inside of cities like Chicago, where I'm sitting,
Right.
and you're going to use that as a way of training the U.S. military for fighting wars overseas is, first of all, ludicrous, but it's also just fundamentally dangerous. We go to great lengths to use the U.S. military as sparingly as possible inside American cities. Sometimes they have to be used, but you try not to do that. And when you do it carefully, and you do everything you can to rely more on the local police force than on the American military. So I think that this is just very, very dangerous. The other thing is talking about the enemy from within, and oftentimes making the argument that that's the left and that's reflected in the Biden administration. It's just something he should not be doing. You do not want to politicize the military. The military is supposed to be apolitical. These folks are supposed to support Joe Biden every bit as much as they support President Trump. He is the commander-in-chief, and Joe Biden, when he was president, was the commander-in-chief. And we can't have an effective military if they don't abide by what the president says, whether he or she is a Democrat or a Republican. And all these generals fully understand that. The other thing is, it's quite clear that what President Trump is doing is he's putting the crosshairs on black officers at the top and on women. If you look at the people that they've fired,
Right.
And this is hardly surprising, I would be willing to bet a lot of money that virtually every general in that audience and every admiral in that audience thinks that this is a categorically bad idea.